Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, I guess. I'm going to struggle not to rant. I won't rant. We have a situation, I think, where the media landscape in the United States is, oh my goodness, where do I even start? It's all over the shop. It's being assaulted at the moment by the government. There's an attack on freedom of speech, but there's also a connection between the MAGA right, the far right in the United States, and Russia, and Putin. Really, we see this to a degree in the UK as well, where the reform voters in the UK are the most likely, according to stats surveys, to like Putin and to be sympathetic towards Russia. They're not hugely so. It's fairly minimal, but it's multiples of what adherents to the other parties are at. So there is definitely, in the UK at least, this connection between the far right and Russia. There is that connection between the far left and Russia, but the far left is less prevalent in Western societies these days. And I think that has been somewhat eroded to a degree. I would suggest that, and you can see this among MAGA Republicans, certain members of the political world, but also the news world, the informational world, are aligned to Russia or have sympathies for Putin, etc., etc. We can see that in things sort of Marjorie Taylor Greene has said, a very anti-Ukraine positioning of a number of MAGA personalities. But we've also seen this among influencers like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, two people that come to prominence that the White House has invited in, given press credentials to, put them on the influencers chair in the press corps, the White House press corps, ask them questions. So we know that Tim Pool and Benny Johnson have taken money from Tenet Media, and that money has come from Russia. And this was exposed, and the FBI exposed this in the back end of the Biden administration. These two people, Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, for example, just as two examples, should have been castigated, thrown out of the media world in the US as being useful idiots or possibly agents of the Russian Federation. And yet the opposite happens. The absolute opposite happens. They get invited into the White House, and Benny Johnson is not persona non grata. He's person number one with regard to what's going on with Charlie Kirk and, Turning Point UK. He's at the heart of the reporting on that. He's a darling of Fox News. And here's a guy that's taken money from the Russian Federation to spread Russian propaganda. What is going on? So this is leading people, and this is Mikhailo Lavrovsky, who is a CEO of a think tank. He's the first Azov Corps in Ukraine combating Russian propaganda, saying, and you could argue that Azov has got this history with being associated with the far right. He's saying, I get why commies and far left idiots are pro-Russian, but the insane number of right-wingers cheering for Russia and Putin is unreal. Russia's billions in information war, in info war, are paying off. Turning Republicans against Ukraine is one of Moscow's greatest victories in this war so far. And I find that particularly interesting because we are going to talk about a right-wing news organization in the United States that has been trying to outfox Fox over the last few years. You've got three of them. There's Fox News, that's the OG of the right-wing, Murdoch-owned right-wing news organizations. And then you've got these two upstarts. One is Newsmax and the other is OAN. And OAN have just sent a reporter to do a whole news story in the Donbas, and that reporter has now been appearing on Russia Today. So you have this connection and spreading Russian propaganda. So you have this connection of OAN, this right-wing news organization, Russia Today as the propaganda arm of the Russian Federation and the Kremlin, integrating with OAN reporting from Russia, spreading spreading Russian propaganda to their right-wing audience in the United States. It's insanely, insanely dangerous. Andrew Perpetua says right-wing conservative news openly admitting that they are working for the Kremlin here, and we have the same from Mara of Kiev. I went to speak to Russian soldiers and they told me Russia is not the enemy, says Pearson Sharp from OAN. Or OANN, it gets called both. So Pearson Sharp here says, okay, I can finally reveal I spent the past week traveling through Donbas in Russia and visiting the people and cities in the region being ravaged by this pointless war. More info to come, and stay tuned to OANN for full coverage. The people here are fighting for their freedom, and their real life stories absolutely destroy the Western narrative about what's happening in Ukraine. I've talked to the men and women living here, fighting here, and they tell me Russia is not the enemy. Ukraine is. And they say they're grateful for what President Putin has done to save them from the Zelensky regime. These are not my words, but theirs. I came here to report what I found. This is it, says Pearson Sharp. Now, if you have followed my channel because of my reporting on Ukraine, you should have all of your alarm bells going. And yet this is both state-sponsored journalism, as in he wouldn't be able to do that if he didn't have sponsorship from the Kremlin. Like, he would not be able to report this. So therefore, this is Russian propaganda coming straight from the Kremlin, essentially, and being filtered through OAN to the American public, the right-wing American public. And then you wonder why influencers like Catturd, huge influencer on Twitter, says, quick, everyone hide your wallets. Zelensky has landed in New York. So Zelensky's in New York for the UN meeting. So Kate from Kharkiv says, look, I was going to be clever, but then I had to report that Russia bombed a house in Zaporizhia, likely burning the people inside alive. So instead of wit, you get a F you moron. This is to Catturd. It's like, Andrew Perpetua reminds us, although Catturd is a real person, but someone who is grifting off grievance narrative and a far-right agenda, Andrew Perpetua reminds us that, I guarantee you, if you limited social media to purely humans without any bot interference, like 90% of the complaining you see would disappear overnight. I'm old enough to have used social media before bots. Do you know what it was? People talking about their hobbies. I think social media companies should be required to do the following, and it would be absolutely devastating to their business model, but I really do not care. 1, label all bots as bots, default to never showing bot activity, and allow users to selectively enable the types of bots they want to see. 2, get rid of fancy algorithms to display content. The only content viewing option should be A, accounts you follow in order either from newest to oldest or oldest to newest. B, a most recent message posted but to the website, fire hose to the face style. C, manually curated feeds. Lots of people share these feeds. I don't care. D, obviously some search tools. That's it. No bots, no engagement algorithms. This is a problem, but people are being influenced. I was listening to Clive Lewis, a Labour MP who was interviewed by the Novara media outlet the other day, talking about how his friend went on the United Kingdom march. He said it was not a racist guy, but was wanting to get pride back, but he was existing in all these information spaces. And it was really interesting listening and saying, look, I was having arguments with him and putting him right on a bunch of things that was just kind of misinformation. And he was like, oh, where do you get this information from? Or Clive Lewis was wondering where he got his information from. It's just these silos that you live in. So people like Catturd might, just be existing on Twitter. And if you don't exist on Twitter, so what? This is just a particular niche on the internet. But actually, these people do inform real people's lives. I mean, Catturd is a real person, but the bots inform real people's opinions. They do work. And this goes back to the idea from Lavrovsky that Russia's billions in information war are paying off. The return on investment is insane. There's a quite tongue-in-cheek here. Know Your Western Genocide Apologist, a NAFO educational resource, and it looks at different types of people and how they get to support, say, a Putin-esque genocidal regime. And you get the communist, the lefty anti-fascist, the hard right, the contrarian, and the peacenik. And we're dealing with the hard right and the contrarian here. So the hard right, I mean, take this as tongue-in-cheek. Why does the hard right support Putin? Likes the fact that Russia is quite fascist, attracted to ultra-macho, racist, sexist Russian military culture, hasn't yet grasped that Russia's military is actually quite rubbish at fighting and usually homophobic, always an a-hole. The contrarian, quote, does their own research and doesn't trust the MSN. Mainstream media, thinks saying the opposite of whatever Western media is saying is really clever, but swallows Russian propaganda like it's something very tasty to them. Thinks you're stupid sheeple. And actually, I've known many contrarians, actually left-leaning contrarians, who swallow this Putin propaganda. So then now we're going to listen to actually some of the reporting this guy has done. Not the reporting itself, but his interview on RT. So he gets interviewed on RT. This is so state-sponsored. It is unbelievable. Kate from Kharkiv, again, responds to Pearson Sharp on Rick Sanchez on RT, saying, as a Russian-speaking Ukrainian from eastern Ukraine, I say this with absolute certainty. The only army that has massacred Russian-speaking Ukrainians is Russia's. They are razing the Donbas. They are obliterating towns and cities and lives. But you don't care, do you, Rick? So the news host. You just want to spew BS online for those sweet Russian rubles. So this is Rick Sanchez platforming Pearson Sharp, the OAN reporter here.
I was walking the streets of Donbas, and
yeah,
it's heartbreaking what has happened over there. And you have people like Victoria Nuland.
Yeah.
And Obama, and they come in and they make these decisions. They think they know better. They're smart. They have all the answers. Mm-hmm. They have an agenda, and they make a decision, just a casual comment. Let's overthrow this person. He needs to go. That's the sentence that's spoken, and that's the end of it. And the repercussions from that, the lives that are destroyed.
So before we go on, you got to remember, one, this is an OAN reporter, so he's deeply anti-democrat, right? So this is the most partisan reporter that you can get in the US. Goes to the Donbas region, which is occupied by Russia, with this explicit permission of Russia to do so, and the Russians will be ensuring this guy is speaking the propaganda narrative that they want. He then speaks to certain Russians that he's allowed to speak to, who will be spouting Russian propaganda, and will be talking about Victoria Nuland and Obama, like Euromaidan protests were Nuland and NATO's and the EU's fault and Obama's fault. Forgetting that actually John McCain was there as a Republican, but nonetheless, the idea that here is that NATO is to blame, the West is to blame for Russia's invasion, and which was justified because of NATO, Russia's invasion into Ukraine and all the war crimes and everything else that followed. So this guy is willingly taking this all in because his position is a hard right contrarian, a hard right anti-Western mainstream media, NATO, EU, US establishment politics narrative. He's anti all of that. He's a burn it all to the ground, let's get a populist in like Trump, who is actually aligned to Putin, etc., etc. So, you know, this is entirely what you would expect, and this is entirely what you get, and it's disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting that this guy is spouting this heinous propaganda, and will be able to do so on OAN, where he has reporters and news anchors. Is Matt Gaetz now on OAN, or is he on Newsmax? But anyway, you know, you get these politicians that are aligned to Putin and Russia, or politicians come newscasters, and it's just all so depressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's rough. And by the way, you know,
it's gut-wrenching.
You're right, and in many ways, we look at this, and a lot of people forget because we talk about, you know, that there have been a lot of civilians who've died in this war. Yeah, there are civilians who've died in this war, but we forget a lot of those civilians died because the Ukrainians attacked them. A lot of those were in Donetsk and Lugansk, yes, and in some of those areas where they were Russian.
So again, this is the Russian narrative, which is a lot of these civilians have died. Now, is he merging from 2014 onwards or to 2022? Or is he talking about 2022 onwards? Because if you're talking about civilians who have died, and if you talk about intentional targeting of civilians, there's a distinct lack of talking about the human Savari here in Kherson. Of course, your man Rick Sanchez here, speaking for Russia Today, is talking about Lugansk. Okay, saying it in a Russian way. And you've got this reporter going, yes. It's complete agreement to this Russian propaganda. Complete agreement.
Being attacked by missiles that were coming in from Ukraine. So if you have a total of 11 to 13,000 people so far who are civilians who've died in this war, which, by the way, that number, one, is too many, but that number is minuscule compared to Iraq, Afghanistan, what's going on right now in Gaza, for example. Yeah. That's a part of the story, too.
Yeah.
No, it's not part of the story. I don't go, so if my house is burgled, right, and I go to the police and say, my house has just been burgled, they've ransacked my house. The police don't go, well, you know what? In Mogadishu, 37 houses have been ransacked just this morning. So, whatever. Your house doesn't mean jack. Try living in Mogadishu. I'm like, dude, my house has been burgled. Please do something about this. Surely you agree it's horrible that my house has been burgled. No, it's not horrible because it's even more horrible somewhere else. And we could argue about numbers there and about actually, whether that is the case anyway, but you get my analogy.
The people who send the missiles over here don't have to look at the faces of the families who've lost their children. And I'm not going to talk about it because I'll lose it.
This guy is full in, right? He's getting genuinely, it appears, emotional because he's been to places which have been no doubt war-torn, and he's been fed a narrative, and what he hasn't done is gone to Ukraine and spoken to people who have had war crimes committed on them left, right and centre by the Russians. This guy is in deep, and it makes me sick.
Camera, but we went to the Alley of Angels in Donetsk, which is a memorial for the children who died, and it's rough, Rick.
Yeah, I know. And it's a story, and you know what? I'm grateful to you as a fellow journalist that you're sharing that story, because it's important for the world to know both sides of the story and not just one. And too many people in the West are prevented from learning the other side of the story.
Now, the other side will come out in time, and there is an element of truth to, we do need to know both sides of every story, of course. But do you know what? During World War II, if I'd been alive, I probably wouldn't have been too open to, oh no, let's really try and understand right now, like while it's happening, while they are murdering Jews in gas chambers, let's try and understand what's going on there. Let's try and get both sides of the story here. No. Like, there's a time and a place for that understanding. We can do the Milgram experiments and we can do the Stanford prison experiments, try and find out the psychology of what's going on here, and we can try and find out the reality of what happened and, whether this... But right now, dude, there are war crimes going on here overwhelmingly from one side compared to the other. And trying to find sympathy and empathy for the perpetrators here is the wrong-headed way of going about this. And OAN and this douchebag here, RT and this utter contemptible dimwit over here, these two are acting on behalf of genocidal regimes. And that is utterly unacceptable. OAN should be fecking ashamed of themselves. And I'm going to end up with a controversial ending here, because I just want people to remember that since you've had all of this, Charlie Kirk's murder was appalling, right? Morally, we understand that. We know that. But just remember, Charlie Kirk was not a good guy, and he existed in this anti-Ukraine information space. Remember, Charlie Kirk said to Volodymyr Zelensky directly, "We don't support you. Show some respect next time. You are an ungrateful, petulant child who is responsible for 1 million dead." That is who Charlie Kirk was. That Zelensky is responsible for the death of 1 million people. Not Russia, not Putin, not the Russian soldiers, not the generals, not the people that send those missiles into apartment blocks. No, they're exonerated. Fecking Zelensky is the one. So there is no functional difference, in my opinion, between Charlie Kirk and Pearson Sharp and Rick Sanchez and OAN and RT. And call that controversial that I am criticizing someone that's recently been killed. Like, he shouldn't have been shot. It was horrible that he was shot. But let's not forget the things he actually said. And this right-wing information space at the moment is dangerous because it's being hijacked successfully by Putin's information war. We need to be awake to this.